Hi, everybody. It's really good to be back. And I want to thank the City Club for having me again. Now, I did do this several years ago, and I talked about TIFs. So there was about 8 tables. And after I was fortunate enough to win the election here, I met with Mayor Daley, and I went to the office. He was very gracious, and I said, Mr. Mayor, there are no TIFs in Washington, D.C. And it's been great since then. We're actually doing really well. It's also good to be home just to see our friends Mike and Kelly and Billy and Christy. Billy taught me a lot about how to pass legislation. People know I'm doing undercover congressman, but where I really learned where the wheels hit the street, in my proudest role, really not congressman or county commissioner, was chief of staff to Bernie Hansen. A good friend and a guy who's been around for a long time with City Club helping out and with the state. My dear friend who helped me get through the University of Chicago School of Public Policy, Barry Merrim, is now with Shefsky. Yay. The Toms, Kelly, Mike, it's really good to be home. They don't tell you about some things in D.C. They don't have time because you win a special election, boom, you're in, right? The allergies are bad, the partisanship is bad, and the food is really bad. They somehow, the seed of democracy doesn't know how to make pizza or hot dogs or cinnamon rolls. And about the hot dogs, I really like Maggiano's, but would anybody here mind if our friends at Superdog brought us about 500 hot dogs next time we had a meal? And I recognize, too, how I got here. I want to recognize my staff. Let them stand up. Sean O'Brien, Kim Walls, Aviva Gibbs, Brendan Moore, Brandon Neese. Anybody else from the district office? I'm not sure they're here. Oh, Ben does communications in D.C., 12 years at Anshe Emmett. Learned his lessons well. Now, I can talk about a lot of things today. I want to say this. Sometimes what you don't say is focused on. That's unfortunate because we don't have unlimited time. I mean, I'd love to talk about repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, DOMA, passing anti-discrimination measures, talking about reasonable gun control, Israel, Iran, what's happening in the Gulf Coast. Those with dozens of other issues are on our mind and in our hearts. But, we'll get to those things. I have to mention, our great friends at Loyola are here and Roosevelt University. Thank you so much for helping me become whatever we've become. So I'm at a year now. It's an interesting job. It's a wonderful job with extraordinary responsibilities. And there's some real gee whiz qualities to it, folks. I walk under the Capitol Dome every day. All right? I got to ride on Air Force One and learned that you can be nice to people on airplanes. The president came back and said, do I miss the middle seat on American with the Dixie cup of Coca-Cola? And the guy with the 180-pound bag trying to put it over your head. It was extraordinary. And I was fortunate enough to be in the White House. And the irony is, and I see my friends Pete and Larry here, and I'm thrilled that they're still there fighting extraordinary fights. But I got to tell you, guys, the third week I was there, it was the 3rd week anniversary of my last county board meeting. I got invited to the White House, the Oval Office, to sign a civil rights history bill with John Lewis and Barack Obama. Civil rights history with the President of the United States and John Lewis, a legend of the civil rights movement. And I'm looking around, and it hit me. This is 3 weeks ago. I was sitting there with Kelly at the county board meeting. And I'm thinking, I'm listening to, 3 weeks ago, I'm listening to my friends, Mr. Beavers, Mr. Pareka, and Mr. Stroger. And I'm looking around the Oval Office, I'm going, this is better. Now, it's not more important because I'll never give up those 10 years, and they were just blessed, right? I mean, wildly important, and I'm proud of where the county is going and what we can do. But you know, those gee whiz qualities run into certain realities, right? That we're in the greatest recession since the Depression. Visit the troops in Iraq. Visit our troops when they come back, and Walter Reed. Flying a Black Hawk helicopter over Baghdad, walking through the streets of Gaza, and then a week later, visiting a bomb-proof playground in Sderot in Israel. That's sort of the wake-up call that reminds you of what the job means and what you're really there for. So while we deal with all those other issues and those things, I got to say the greatest challenges we face are two deficits. A deficit of finances at the state level, all states, and the federal level, and perhaps more important, the deficit of trust. Because the way out of the first problem is going to require trust. It's going to require courage. And that first problem can be overcome. But we have so much more to overcome with people's attitudes toward government. Some of you might watch, I was on Colbert recently. First question, tell you what people think of Illinois, is given, hey, Quigley, you're from Illinois, given your predecessors, what's going on there, have you picked out a prison yet? I said, I'm just trying to keep the batting average over 500, okay? And I kid around today, but I hear the jokes on the floor, folks. What did one Illinois prisoner say to the other Illinois prisoner? The food was better here when you were governor. I'm just telling you what I hear. Hunting for corruption in Illinois is like hunting for cows. It comes up to you and moos. But I say thank God for New York, New Jersey, and Florida. So we are jokes here to the rest of the country, but it's painful, dark humor here. So fundamentally, if you take anything from what I'm trying to convey to you today, is that the real cost of corruption is the deficit of trust, that it is almost impossible to lead. It is almost impossible to govern when the public doesn't trust you. So when folks say, Mike, I want this to be your issue or that to be your issue, this is a great country. We can do more than one thing at a time, right? I get that. But I think in the end, what we need to focus on first and foremost is getting back the public's trust. And that principally stems from being transparent and accountable and not thinking about ethics once a month or once a year or having a package of bills. No, it has to be ingrained in absolutely everything we do. So if you'll bear with me, just a few of the financial figures of where we're at and why we need to change things. At the federal level, we'll remind folks that this is financial responsibilities and ethical lapses are bipartisan. I say stupidity wears both hats on occasion. The Congressional Budget Office numbers show that without the spending increases of the Bush years, the deficit would be no greater than 2% of GDP this year. This year we face a 10% deficit, and deficits will range from 4 to 6% in the coming years. These deficits add to our federal debt, which will reach 100% of GDP by 2020 and 200% of GDP by 2040. Folks, this is Greek-like numbers that we're talking about here in the United States of America. And obviously, the massive debt to GDP ratio is unsustainable. And obviously, inaction will have its consequences. Based on these CBO projections, by 2040, federal revenues will pay for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on borrowing, as in everything else, folks, won't be paid for. Pension crisis. You know, why do I bring this up? It's interesting that we raise the pension issues these days, and folks say, hey, that's not a federal responsibility. Well, first of all, on the private side, it's much part of our responsibility. But it also is on the public side. This is very much part of the social contract that people have worked hard all their life for something and they assume that something's going to pay off in the end. If you analyze the situation with pensions, that promise could be broken. In addition, if the pension system collapses on the public side alone, it could also bring down municipal bonds, and we'd be right where we were at the depths of this recession. So when folks tell me, well, Quigley, that's not a federal issue, I would remind them that everything that stimulus bailed out for the states wasn't a federal issue either. It's implied that the federal government will help states out on this issue. So, hey, if you don't need our help, fine, but let's look at the situation just to be aware. And I'm just bringing out one issue on the federal side and one issue on the state side. Pensions. Out of the $140 billion in cumulative state debt in Illinois, $130 billion is related to the state's pensions and retiree health care programs. Today, state's unfunded pension obligations amount to $25,000 per Illinois household. In the meantime, Illinois is delaying payments to health care providers and other vendors, slow paying in school districts and universities, and borrowing hundreds of millions to fund operations. So why be concerned at the federal level? Again, it is the expectation the federal government won't allow the states to fail. And again, without the stimulus package, the states probably would have failed, or at least many would have. Fundamentally, these policies are at the very least unfair to our children. So what are the effects of all this? Let's look at the numbers that relates to the loss of trust. I think it attributes to a great deal of the low turnout in Illinois. But a recent Pew poll, only 22% of Americans trust government to do the right thing. What does that mean? It means that 8 out of 10 people in this country think that government will screw up and not do the right thing. It means, in another poll, 57% of Illinoisans think our state has the most corrupt politicians. As I said, this makes it impossible this makes it impossible to govern. We add to this the divisive partisan rhetoric which replaces thoughtful debate. So when I ran, folks said, well, we don't want you to leave the county board. There's much to do there. And there certainly is. I think we're in good hands, at least today, with 2 of the folks in the audience doing a great job. But D.C. and Cook County shouldn't be disconnected. We are interdependent, and we need each other to accomplish some of these things. You also don't change your DNA just because you change office. So with an extraordinary great staff helping us, we did co-sponsor PAYGO, which passed, which says Congress can only vote for things that they have funded. We've introduced better accounting for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We introduced the first ban on corporate earmarks. The House took up the proposal and have a 1-year moratorium on corporate earmarks. We introduced SELPA, which allows states to actually pass reform legislation. Illinois actually did pass a great reform piece of legislation called SELPA, saving ethics laws for states, and then the federal government made them stop doing it. This legislation will help the states reform themselves. We voted against defense appropriations bill because it had wasteful projects, including a helicopter the president didn't want, F-22s the president didn't want, and a helicopter which does very little but kill our own soldiers and cost us a lot of money. On ethics measures, again, if you're going to be consistent and be the same person you were as we were in the county board, we voted against our party on investigations involving 2 of the most powerful members of the House, the late Mr. Murtha and Mr. Rangel. We also called to expedite and expand the investigation of the countrywide loan scandals, where unfortunately members of both parties of the House were receiving extraordinarily low mortgages to help a company which helped bring this country to its knees. Some of this also is leading by example. We helped block the automatic pay raise for members of Congress. That measure passed last week. My office returned $100,000 to the Office of the Budget, which goes to the U.S. Treasury. And some of the things my staff has done that were just amazing. We have just introduced the largest transparency act in the history of Congress. This will do extraordinary things in expanding oversight of federal contracts, It will provide unprecedented access and accountability, first ever one-stop shopping of databases of earmarks, and new definitions and rules for lobbyists. We also co-founded and launched last week the Bipartisan Transparency Caucus. I founded it with Republican Representative Darrell Issa from San Diego, and our goal is to enforce the current transparency laws, pursue new initiatives, and make information available and easily accessible to the public. Where do we go from here? I was in Denver when the president accepted the nomination for Democratic nomination for President of the United States. Big crowd, if you remember, 80,000 people at a football stadium, and he gave a brilliant speech. And at the expectant times, people stood and gave him standing ovations. About halfway through, he had this little throwaway line where he said, we can't just keep expanding the size of the federal government. We need to reinvent government. He said we need to streamline, consolidate, and innovate and make our government matter because the mission matters. And I stood up and cheered. I was like one guy in 80,000, yay! I was sitting next to Tom and Alderman Preckman, and they're like, would you sit down? I said, this is my stuff. I wrote this report. But think about it, folks. We are facing extraordinary challenges. We've never been able to do those things for partisan reasons, right? We've never been able to reinvent government because of gridlock and corruption. But now, boy, if you're waiting for the public to be more angry, you probably won't be here the one to change things. So I think that's all possible. I think now's the time. And what he said was important. We're not the far right, the farthest right, who doesn't like what government does. And unfortunately, we can't afford to have the mindset and the good heart, I think, of the far left that we can tax and spend our way out of these issues. Our mission matters. It matters that we pick up the garbage. It matters that we protect our country. There are those out there speaking in front of large groups about how evil government is. Government workers were the ones who risked life and limb in New York this weekend with a car loaded as a bomb. And for all anyone knew, it could have been as deadly as the ones that took out a federal building 20 years ago. So those are all federal workers. The heroes of 9/11 were government workers. So our mission matters, but we have to have the courage to recognize that what we do here in Chicago and Cook County and Illinois affects the rest of the country. And we don't need 700 school districts in Illinois, and we don't need township government in Illinois. And we have to be very careful about how we manage the scarce resources we have. So I think the president was right. So if we just do what he said, we'll be fine. Now, on the debt, they talked about having a commission and going through all these ideas. Look, the bottom line is staff can put together 20 things that we could do. It's like a menu at Denny's. You pick 4 or 5 items, folks. They're going to be tough decisions. There are going to be issues. We have tough choices to make on Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, tax expenditures, and the like. Our government, what kind of military we're going to have. But we don't need a commission to tell us. We pretty much know there's 20 things you got to choose. You got to choose 10 of them to come up with the numbers we get so that we don't become Greece. And those choices have to be made relatively soon. So I'd like to think that's why we get elected. We didn't create the situation in a day. It's not going to be solved in a day. Today's kind of appropriate if you watch today's news, the reason some of the press couldn't be here today, some of the press conferences that are taking place only in Illinois. I got into this business because I was a big environmentalist. And the thought and the theme of being an environmentalist was we should leave the world in a better place for our kids than the one we inherited. Just start thinking about that in terms of government. And it doesn't necessarily matter what your policies are or what party you are, but if the public trusts you, if they think you work hard and you care, they may disagree with you, but I think you got a shot at getting reelected, even if you make those tough choices. If they know what you're doing, if they can see what's going on and they don't hear about some backroom deal that they think hurts them. My pollster said, corruption is maybe 6th or 7th on people's issues. He said, but if the public gets it in their mind that the economy, which is number 1, is tied to your stupidity, then you're toast. I think people need to recognize that. When I got elected and I got sworn in, if you win a special election, there is a real treat. You get to speak on the floor of Congress to everybody at once, and they have to shut up for 2 minutes and listen to you. Let me tell you, it never happens again. So I strapped it up, and I spoke for 2.5 minutes, and I wore my Loyola tie. Didn't match my suit, but I made a promise. And next time, it's my Roosevelt tie. And, you know, I thought, well, what can you say now in these economic times on the heels, really, of an election that, the first election after the Blagojevich-Burrs debacle, right? And my first thought was it came down to trust, right? And what an honor it was that the public trusted me with this job when many were losing theirs. And they put me in that house when many were losing theirs. So every day if you wake up and you're a congressman and you think about the numbers and how it ties to real people, I think you'll do a decent job. For me, it's 10, 3, 2, 1. For every 10 people in my district, 3 of them have a mortgage. Their house costs them more than it's worth. They owe more than their house is worth. 30% underwater. 2 people don't have health care. A lot of folks said, hey, we should be focused on this issue instead of that. You know what? This is a great country. We can do more than one thing at a time. 3 out of 10 underwater, 2 don't have health care benefits, and 1 of them doesn't have a job. So when you see this undercover congressman, it is at least an attempt at a listening device. DC can be very isolating, and members all have different and unique ways of staying in touch with their constituency. So if you see me in the back of a garbage truck, a sanitation truck, or at Super Dogs where I learned how to pour the Cokes just right, it's an attempt to stay in touch with all of you. I appreciate those who trusted me to be in this position, and I want to thank all of you for being here today. Have a nice day. God bless.
All right, I think we have a few questions, please. Thank you, Stella. Keep those questions coming for a little while. Congressman has agreed to stay a bit. Okay, you want to do that? Oh, absolutely, you should do that one. Okay. You want to do that first?
Yes.
All right.
Sorry. I would be remiss in not introducing the owner of the Chicago Blackhawks, our great friend, Rocky Wirtz. Now, he's with my hockey team, which has now won 3 championships in a row. Let's hear it for the Lawyers hockey team. Hawks and 6, by the way, folks.
All right, thanks for that. All right, got a question from a City Club member, John Lee. What should the federal government do in the Arizona immigration law dispute? Should we have amnesty for working immigrants?
Well, a couple people have pointed out this would have been avoided if Congress would have acted, as several presidents before have tried, to pass meaningful, responsible immigration reform years ago. And it's overdue, and it needs to happen right now. We have to appreciate, for this to pass, it's not going to have to be an issue about one ethnic group, because that is, for many people, the public's perception. This is not an issue about Mexicans. This is not an issue about Asians. This is not an issue about the Irish. This is an issue about the Polish. It is about everyone. It is about the essential qualities of our country's creed and who we are. And if they don't believe that, then they should take down that statue in New York Harbor.
All right, I'm gonna combine 2 questions. One is from me. You spoke of regaining the public's trust. Can you comment, please, on the lack of trust between and among the two major parties and how that's contributing to the emergence of other parties? And then one from Mandy Shaw's, what measures do you feel are necessary to begin repairing the deficit of trust?
I actually thought there wasn't a lot of partisanship on the county board. There really wasn't. I mean, to be honest, Pete Silvestri is a really good example. We co-sponsored each other's legislation. I know that Larry feels confident enough to work with Republicans as well as the Democrats. I know there's more partisanship in Springfield, but in D.C. it's poison. Honest to goodness. And I'm not going to say the Republicans are worse, because I think it's equal across the board. There are members of Congress who think it's a good day because they got a shot out and winged the other party. And it's like, you know, they're not the enemy, right? We have a lot of enemies right now, foreign and domestic. So the only way that can change is if the voters try to discourage them. In terms of trying to regain the public's trust, I think it's leading by example, what you introduce, what you do, how you vote. And I know, for me, what I would tell them is, if I have succeeded, it's because of this. It is because I know there are folks who disagree with me on a lot of issues. And I really appreciate the fact that they still vote for me, because I like to think that they trust us and respect us. So one of the problems with coming out there way out front on transparency and ethics and so forth is people think, oh, it's so self-righteous or sanctimonious and so forth. Look, as long as, you know, or at least two members of the cloth here, they will agree. As long as they make us out of flesh and blood, we will fall short. But it is the idea that we all fall short, but we must show the public we're doing the best we can to be transparent and, frankly, pass the obvious low-hanging fruit, folks, in Chicago, Cook County, Illinois, and in D.C. that shows the public that you mean it.
All right, this is from Susan Nordstrom Lopez, President Advocate, Illinois Masonic Medical Center here in the city on the north side. Congressman, thank you for your support of Illinois Masonic's green initiatives. We've just been named Chicago's only Energy Star hospital for the third straight year. Where do you see Congress going next on energy reform and sustainable green initiatives, particularly as they make business and healthcare more efficient?
Well, the Waxman bill that dealt with global warming was at least an attempt to do that. It wasn't a perfect bill, but we recognize that we moved forward. It was important. Now we're waiting for the Senate. It sounds like something I said a lot. Now we're waiting for the Senate. Barney Frank said a great line. He said, why is the Senate so easy to analyze? Because it has no moving parts. They do. It's just it's a different set of rules, and I know our Senator Durbin and Senator Burris are doing their absolute best there, but it is frustrating. What's more frustrating is at least one of our competitors, China, doesn't see this as a bad thing. They see this as a way to succeed. They're going to invest in innovative energy. They're going to outspend us multifold in innovation in energy, because they know that they have to bend that cost curve if they're going to pass us and be the industrial giant that they want to be. So we have folks, with all due respect, who see this as a burden, right? They see this as something that is a challenge, but can help them do this. And if the events of the last week in the Gulf don't recognize this, it has to begin with conserving what energy we have and being innovative with solar power and wind power and so forth. Thank you.
This is from Mike Bryson, Roosevelt University. What's your take on the prospects of Congress passing climate change legislation?
See Barney Frank below. I think the Senate will come up with an entirely different bill. I think they're going to look at it from an entirely different angle in the final effort. but it's very hard to predict how things will play out. What you just saw in the last 2 weeks was the Senate deciding, is it going to be immigration reform or is it going to be climate change? Implied from that, from Reid and others, was that they were only going to do one or the other. They weren't going to do both. And they were literally arguing over which one is going to be the one that grabs the stage. That could change tomorrow. So I'd like to think that they could do both. But if we're trying to bet on safe ground, I assume that it will be one or the other. And I'd like to think, well, if I had to guess today, it'll probably be dealing with energy.
A few more. This is from Chester, and I'm sorry I can't read the last name. Are you here, Chester? Starts with a K. That's the one. All right. Having been a key player in the 1988 ordinance that authorized night games at Wrigley Field, what are your thoughts about the scenario that now exists in Lakeview, i.e., more night games or, you know?
There's a movie where the guy goes, they keep pulling me back. Let me begin in the middle and the end say that I defer to the alderman from there. I wish the Ricketts all the best. I have hope. Anybody can have a bad century. Am I deflecting this enough? Look, I'm not a ninja fighter. Just give me a few fights at a time. Thank you.
All right, this is a question from Ashvin Ladd. Which Republicans have you found the easiest to work with, and what about them makes them easy to work with?
Ashvin, are you still here? Ashvin is a good guy. We're going to sit down. He ran in the primary, endorsed by the Tribune and Sun-Times in the Republican primary. A good guy. It is the ones that don't wear their partisanship on their sleeve. They're the ones that I can walk over and they'll fold over a piece of paper and go over detailed information about Afghanistan and Pakistan. The guys you could go to a Cub game with. There's quite a few Republicans that show up at your place, aren't there, Mike? But the bottom line is there's quite a few. What you see is the partisanship stuff flare up, and there's too many that do that. But I would still say that the majority of Democrats and Republicans will cross the aisle, co-sponsor legislation, work together. Besides learning, you win a special election, there's 434 new kids to meet at the high school, but many across the aisle were very courteous in sharing information. There's an extraordinary learning curve in this job, and I would say there were just as many Republicans as Democrats who were willing to exchange information. And after November 2nd, I'll tell you specifically who those other Republicans are.
Okay, I think we have the last one here, unless there are others. John Lag. What constituent services does your office provide, and how does a congressional office facilitate access to federal programs and funding and connect those with constituents?
Sounds like my staff put this in there. Remind folks that Kim Walls is my district director, and she has cards available for anyone. Yay, Kim!
Hey, Kim!
She's put up with me for almost 10 years. She wants a gold watch. I just tell her what time it is. It's much cheaper. Having worked for Alderman Hanson and shared an office with Alderman Tunney, I will tell you that an alderman's frontline office gets more calls and requests. We handle a lot of Social Security, immigration issues, veterans issues, Medicaid, Medicare. The staff does an amazing job with the recent horrific situation in Haiti, for example. They saved lives. They've done remarkable things for people stuck out of the country. But I think there's that baseline service, but there is also a recognition that what we learn at the district level can actually create legislation. So one of the things we got learning about what was happening with the mortgage renewal program, HAMP, we actually amended some of that legislation strictly from constituent request. So they turned a constituent issue into law. because they knew what that issue meant for that individual, and we passed 2 amendments that actually made that legislation better and helped people refinance their mortgages when they were in trouble. So there's a whole variety of things to do, and if you have like 4 hours, sit with Kim and she'll tell you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman, for honoring us with your presence today.